11 months ago, we had our first episode dedicated to the latest wave in artificial intelligence, or AI. Title of that episode, Who's Afraid of ChatGPT? We've come a long way since. Earlier this week, OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, launched what it called its new flagship model, ChatGPT 4.0, O meaning omni or all. We have moved some way toward accepting AI in everyday life. There is no denying its power, or that it has only grown more powerful. Can that power be tamed? How do we control AI? Good evening, I'm John Nery, and you are in the public square. I had the good fortune to serve as moderator of a thrilling discussion on AI at the third Investigative Journalism Conference. I wanted to continue the conversation and was able to invite two of the four excellent panelists to join us tonight. Carol Ilagan is Assistant Professor of Journalism at the University of the Philippines, a Fulbright Scholar, an editor with the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, and an AI Accountability Fellow at the Pulitzer Center. Dominic Doc Ligot is the evangelist for responsible AI who wears many hats, including as founder of Cyrolytics and founder of Data Ethics PH, and also as member of the Board of Trustees of PCIJ. Welcome, Carol, and welcome back, Doc.
Thanks for
Thank you for joining us in the
John.
public square. Let me start by asking you for successful use cases or examples of AI with you, Carol, in journalism and then outside journalism, Doc.
Yeah. There have been a lot of good cases of the use of AI in journalism. So we can look at it from the investigative standpoint and also even yung mga simpler things, like transcribing, crawling through data and all. But maybe one of the best examples I would say is there's this global collaboration being led by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. So you might have heard of the Panama Papers, John, but not that particular one, but the succeeding collaborations that they did. So you might recall the Pandora Papers, FinCEN files. Now, medyo ang daming terms, but essentially, the value of AI with these kinds of collaborations is because the collaborations relied heavily on a lot of data. They used different ways on how to understand the data better. So in maybe less technical terms, yung natural language processing, computer vision, but essentially the point is they're able to draw connections from a lot of documents and data. So we're speaking of leaks pa nga itong mga to. So these aren't just, like thousands of records, but millions of records. So essentially, ang value niya ay, for example, in one of the collaborations, they were able to find, prominent names or yung tinatawag natin na PEPs or politically exposed persons. So these types of reports would not have been possible without the use or aid of AI. Now, I'm not saying, it's only because of AI, but of course, they still had to do, groundwork. But definitely in terms of looking for leads, malaki yung tulong ng AI.
So AI makes it possible for investigative journalists to deal with a large amount of data,
Right, that's
which
right.
would be impossible to go through if you're doing it manually.
Yes.
And how does it do that? Are there specific apps for this, or does the consortium cobble together its own tech for this?
Yeah, so as I understand, of course, there are third-party applications, and there are also applications that some newsrooms build. So in this case, they built their own. Kasi yun nga, largely because confidential yung records also. So as I understand, part of it is machine learning. So essentially, hindi naman siya, basta natuto lang, no? So galing rin doon sa mga journalists yung inputs. So yun yung kumbaga parang naging guide for those projects. So the beauty of it is because it's a global collaboration, not only did it, allow journalists to look for leads from the massive amount of data, but they were able to share it also with all of the partners from more than 100 countries, the Philippines in particular. So the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, where Doc and I are part of, is one of the partners of ICIJ. So little did I know a few years back, and every time I would log in dun sa kanilang repository, AI, ano na pala yun, AI aided na pala yun. So, but it's simple, you log in, you try to look for names, we start with politicians here in the Philippines, and it'll bring you or give you a list of saan lumalabas yung mga pangalan na yun. Now, of course, in the context of offshore leaks, ayun nga, you begin to question or wonder why, there are activities offshore, yung ilan sa ating mga politicians or part of the business elite. Ayan.
Yeah, I have a few more questions about journalism-related issues, but maybe we'll have time later for that. Doc, it's been almost a year since we had our conversation. And the subtitle of that episode was "Fear and Trembling Over AI." I think there's much less of that now, right? And I think there's realization of the inevitability of coming to terms with AI, of integrating it into our respective workspaces and so on. Can you give us also successful use cases of AI outside journalism?
Yeah, I think broadly, I've spoken about three main benefits of generative AI specifically. Productivity is the biggest. And most of that is really creating assistants, whether journalist assistants, teaching assistants. I work a lot with the BPOs, and the big buzzword is agent assist, where you may not necessarily get rid of the agent, but the AI is there with the agent, listening in the conversation, proactively giving, suggestions. And the order of magnitude is something that would have taken 30 minutes. 5 minutes na lang. Finish, no? So productivity is a big one. Creativity, and I put it in quotes, is a second one. And this spans the gamut from content creation, from art, copywriting. I was in the Penn Congress last year, and copywriters are feeling the pinch. Companies are just insourcing copywriting requests rather than hiring a copywriter na lang. I can talk about that also. But the biggest one I think is underrated is related to journalism also is knowledge management. So AI is just fantastic at scouring through documents. For example, I still like chat PDF. You upload a PDF and you can talk to the PDF like it was a chatbot. I feel there's so many variants of that use case that you can apply everywhere. Talk to your thesis, talk to your CV, talk to your repository of news articles. And that has massive implications for education, obviously, but also for professions that have a large amount of text, like legal, medical. So I think that's where the action is at the moment.
So productivity, creativity, understood more broadly, and knowledge management. Is there a successful example of an educational institution using AI? I mean, I think that's something. We're both teachers, so
actually, Ateneo. I'm in close contact with Professor Joben Ilagan. He's in the innovation school. And they successfully rolled out a chatbot. It could be it sounds mundane, pero it's a chatbot that aids in enrollment and FAQs for students. And the nice thing about that feat is they were successful in ingesting all of these legacy documents, student handbooks, enrollment procedures, to eliminate, obviously, one of the fears of AI is hallucination. So this chatbot doesn't hallucinate, very proactive in answering students' requests. And that has generally improved the productivity of that department. And I feel that's where more direction is going to come from other departments, down to rolling out a student's assistant. I think Harvard was one of the first, as early as, I think, August last year, they rolled out a chatbot assistant in their computer science course.
So I like the way you zeroed in on the use of assistants. Is that only for the productivity side, or does it also apply to knowledge management, creativity? Essentially, what generative AI can do for us at this moment in time is create assistants for us in these different fields?
Yeah, I think you can even gross it up further. anything you rely on a website for or an app for could conceivably be a chatbot in the very near future. Kaya nga, at one point I said, baka ito na yung, this is the real Web3 that people were talking about, diba? Not the blockchain stuff, or maybe Web4, para blockchain can have Web3, where static data becomes dynamic. You can talk to the data. And I feel that's really, in a positive sense, the best use of these technologies. Of course, you can't help but speculate if jobs will be eliminated. But at the same time, jobs can be augmented. And that's the big, in a way, debate now, especially in the outsourcing industry. How many call centers will be eliminated versus how many will be augmented?
Carol, as a journalist and as a journalism educator, how does this strike you, this whole range of new affordances, new features? How do we make sense of this as journalists?
I guess, of course, without any disregard for, the ethical considerations, when we talk about impact on labor, for instance, I'm excited, especially yun nga, looking at how other newsrooms in other countries, not just in the global north, but even you have some examples in Southeast Asia, where they are able to leverage yung kanilang reporting using AI. So, of course, we're talking about investigative reporting on one hand. It takes a long time, special project yan, where you put in a lot of resources. But it could be, a big help even especially for small newsrooms, given the nature of our work here. Multitaskers yung ating mga journalists. Ikaw na yung of course, we transcribe naman, But sometimes you end up, ikaw rin gagawa ng the social media package, all the charts. So if mahanap natin yung place where, AI or in a way could assist you dun sa mga tedious work para mas makapag-focus tayo on where, more focus is needed, like sa analysis part, the writing part of the story. I think yun yung parang that's what I'm excited about. But of course, again, not discounting, of course, all the other issues that.
That's right.
Yeah.
We'll talk. We'll have lots of time to talk about the ethical issues. In fact, that's the main focus I'd like us to zero in. But Doc, you've advised businesses, organizations on AI adoption. If you were advising a newsroom, just listening to what Carol said, what would be some of the first things you would say?
Yeah, so one of the, I think, counterintuitive things about these chatbots is they're actually rife with confirmation bias. And that's where hallucinations come from. For example, a very common prompt. How many times does the word tea appear in Rappler? And you'll find out it will say, 12 times, 3 times, because it looks to please you. And then you say, no, it doesn't really appear there. Can you give me a more proper result? And then the chatbot will figure out, okay, so it wants me to be critical. Then it'll give you, no, the word T doesn't, the letter T doesn't appear in Rappler. So that's a problem on both fronts. Number one, on the prompting, if you trigger a chatbot intentionally to say something bad, most of the time it will do something bad. And then second, a more subtle issue is how they were trained. Because obviously to come up with text.
Sorry, who's
trained? The authors of the chatbot, like OpenAI, to develop something that can write sensible sentences, they had to ingest a lot of text. And that apparently, evidently, contained a lot of bias, notwithstanding the copyright issues. So I feel as newsrooms, you have to be mindful of those two things, that they were trained with biased data, and a lot depends on how you trigger them. And I think that's where a lot of work, let's say in OpenAI and abroad, has been on trying to re-engineer these chatbots with guardrails, and that has resulted in things like Gemini, where it's inherently biased, pa rin on the opposite side. But I think that's where policy should come in. That's where process should come in. So I feel that things like there's the Paris Charter for journalists a couple of months back. That's really where responsible use, acceptable use comes in. So be mindful of the bias, be mindful of prompting them the wrong way. But otherwise, feeding them the right information solves most of the issues. That's why I'm a big fan of guided chatbots as opposed to like open chatbots.
I got the impression after our panel discussion a couple of weeks ago, that we had many questions that were specific to practical use. Which should I use for transcribing, for doing the social media, and so on. Listening to you just now, in response to what Carol said, is it correct for me to say that what you're saying is that you should have this little talk first with each journalist? Hey, these are the limits. There's this confirmation bias, and there's also the matter of training before we go out and experiment with the different apps.
Actually, what's happening now is because it's really hard to train that instinct from scratch. Is the authors of apps are essentially just putting a layer on top of a chatbot, so it's not free for all, and there's a predefined number of functions, and the prompts are already pre-programmed. So if it's a transcription bot, it's essentially just a front end to a chatbot, but specifically for transcription. And maybe, in the long run, that's a more viable approach. But using a general purpose chatbot can still be very good, especially if you're in research. You want to be you don't want to have too many limitations in your inquiry. Just be conscious that, those flaws exist. And that's also the potential for misuse. Right? I mean, it's nice to be able to write any text, but then that opens the door to plagiarism, something like that. It's nice to be able to generate any image, but that opens the door to identity theft. I mean, two sides of the same problem.
Yeah. Carol, despite the successes, or maybe because of the successes in the application of AI to investigative journalism, can we talk about some of the issues that continue to persist, that continue to worry us as journalists or as journalism educators?
Yeah, I think Doc started it. Yun nga, we're talking about bias. There are a lot of stories where, yun nga, for example, there's this recent story by The Markup, and there's another newsroom also. They looked at apparently, ChatGPT, for instance, is being used to evaluate CVs, and then the result would be they experimented. Pinaltan lang nila yung pangalan, pero same lang yung laman ng CV.
But the result was different.
Now, yung names, it could be Asian yung name. So, yung better results or better assessment, ang number one lagi ay babae na Asian. And of course, yun nga, pagka lalaki na African-American, mababa yung rating. Pero same lang yung laman niya. So, yun, that's one example of yun nga, bias. And then, we can also look at it, not precisely the application itself or the program, but we look at it from the bigger perspective of the AI supply chain. So who are the people who are training all of these systems, who are training AI for Google, Amazon, etc. Now, you look at a lot of countries in the global south, including the Philippines. Apparently, we carry out much of the digital work to make these AI systems work. And may cost yun, because you'll find a lot of stories na, I mean, of course, there are nuances, but some of the stories that you will hear, ayun nga, exploitation, they don't get paid. Of course, hindi mo sure kung baka tapos na yung project, no? One example is Appen is a outsourcing work for AI, but natapos na yung kontrata nila with Google. So a lot of people lost their source of living. So yun, that's another issue also that we need to look at. So apart from the bias and yun nga, yung experience using the app or the system or the tool, but also yun nga, how it works, yun nga, no, the supply chain behind AI.
Let's talk about the implications on labor for the moment. You pointed out that it can make you more productive. AI can make you more productive, but at the same time, you can be exploited, or you can lose your job. How should we think about this, AI and labor?
Well, it's actually very sensitive because, on the one hand, you can't prevent companies from exploiting economic advantages, and that was an issue long before AI. I think one thing that changes everything now is because AI can be so pervasive. Because it's content. So many jobs that are basically just content management jobs, everything from education down to journalism, is people creating and analyzing content. So now it boils down to the essence of the job. No? Will eliminating, let's say, a journalist affect the integrity of news? Potentially. But then are newsrooms or are owners of media companies willing to pay the cost? That's a gray area. And then on the broader note, I think a bigger challenge is we don't have equitable, I think access and control over these tools. Like Philippines would be a net consumer, and all of the control is in California. These big tech. That's the same issue we have with social media. So I'm sure that has to factor into the equation somehow. And right now, I would say we're not conscious. When I say we, government, the Philippines is not conscious about our place in this global AI ecosystem to be able to assert our rights. If most of the, let's say, in extremities, if most of the AI content is trained in Manila or in the Philippines, why don't we have a say in how AI workers are treated? That kind of imbalance needs to be resolved.
Carol, in your presentation at the conference, you offer this framework, which I found very useful, a three-stage framework for understanding technology appropriation, adoption, and then adaptation, and then integration. Can you walk us through that? And then how can that help us think through what's happening in AI right now?
Yeah. That model is by yung model of technology appropriation by Professor Carol. Not me.
Different Carol.
Different Carol with a C. Yeah. Ayun, tinitingnan niya yun nga, no, the way we use technology. So on one hand, yun nga, a part of it is may stages siya where yung adoption, you use it, no? Kung paano mo siya gamitin, no? So it could be, pwedeng specific to a particular task na you want to solve or you want to address. And then it goes to the second level, which is adaptation. So it could be, pwede mo siyang, yun nga, i-adapt para sa specific problem ng inyong newsroom, for instance. And then the last one would be integration, na kumbaga, parte na siya noong system ng isang newsroom. Now, I looked at this framework primarily because apart from those stages, tinitingnan rin kasi niya ano yung factors na nag-influence whether or not you would, adopt, adapt, or integrate. So I thought it's very useful pag tinignan natin yung context in the Global South, for instance, where you have issues with resources, especially if, let's say, a lot of AI-aided apps are may bayad, or if, let's say, you want to build your own system, so that can be resource heavy also. So yun yung parang kaya I thought it was useful kasi yun, it also looks at the factors. Now, pag titingnan yung scenario natin dito, well, yun nga, medyo hindi siya surprise kasi alam naman natin na even during the IJ conference, yun nga, very practical yung mga tanong, nandun pa tayo dun sa, kumbaga, unang stage, but yun nga, as Doc mentioned earlier, dapat yun, mindful tayo of yun nga, the potential pitfalls when we're looking at AI tools at kung paano tayo matutulungan ito in our journalism work.
What are the decision points for a newsroom or any workspace to decide to, okay, we're going to move up to the second stage adaptation, or we're going to integrate? I mean, from your research, what are the indicators?
Yeah, it depends on the agenda of the newsroom, also how it would want to take advantage of AI. For dun sa review ko of, newsrooms that have done it in other countries, especially in the US, in the UK, and even other countries in the Global South. Usually because it's specific to a certain project that they want to do. And these are the kinds of projects that they wouldn't be able to do without AI. So usually yun. Kaya tumatawid to adaptation because na-realize yung need. Now, this is beyond, generative.
Sure.
Ayun, kasi yun nga, like the example that I gave earlier na malaking tulong yung AI for that particular project. So, it's based on the need, which I think is good because ikaw yung nagde-define of how you want to use AI. That's why in my presentation, I titled it Co-opting AI.
And investigating AI.
AI.
Doc, I wanted to ask you about that. When you're dealing with a medium-sized or a large newsroom or workspace, would you recommend that they, for instance, they're new to AI, would you recommend that they go into AI with a very specific need in mind? Like, we'll have a specific project and we'll try to find out, what this can do. Rather than, okay, we're all
Free for all.
we're all going into AI, it's like a whole top to bottom thing.
Yeah. Well, and this is not a cop-out. It's a ratio. Maybe 70% is very narrow. You have very specific tasks, very specific needs. So you either get AI to do that or you have fit-for-purpose apps. Because business has to, function more efficiently. But you allocate 20 to 30% for kind of open use, R&D. That's where the creativity comes in. And I feel that ratio moves around depending on the maturity of the newsroom, depending on the kinds of stories you run. Investigative journalism tends to be rather different from your day-to-day news desk. You got to get deep into the story. So obviously, I would expect investigative journalists to have a very, very kind of open-ended use of AI because they'll have many types of use cases at their disposal, while the more operational type of news, I mean, at some point, everything becomes an app, and every app will probably have AI. That's what I'm seeing in the near future. So just substitute AI for any of the apps you have. And why would you want to do that? I think it gets you out of the natural limitations of apps also. Apps tend to be very canned, very, very rigid, while AI gives you a little bit of that flexibility.
Let me tweak my question and apply it to a non-journalistic example. Let's say I'm a school administrator, and my question is: do I want to start with an AI project so I can learn what AI is capable of doing for us on something that is not like core of
Something you can experiment with.
something that we can experiment with? Or do I say, oh no, we're gonna go to the heart of the school, and it's about teaching and so on. I'm just looking for a way to frame this.
Well, it's nice that you use education as the case study. Much as, this is the reality. Much as you'd like to play it safe and allocate AI only to kind of an experimental department, the reality is the entire education market for education is disrupted already. And I would say there are some schools that may no longer be viable, either because the other schools are moving much faster, they're getting more students, or they haven't adopted an AI curriculum yet. So even if you wanted to play it safe, maybe the reality is within the next 12 to 24 months, you're going to have to bite the bullet anyway. Another big pressure for schools is labor. Teachers need to be taught how to teach with AI also, and the absorption there will vary. I would imagine STEM comes first, but I think for generative AI, the biggest opportunity is the non-STEM, the humanities. That's where a lot of documents are, but no one's pushing it in that direction. Again, things could immediately, instantly change over the next few months if people start adopting it.
Carol, your presentation also was about holding AI accountable. So how do we do that in general terms? How do we hold it accountable?
I think I'm happy that we're having yung discussions na to about AI, but I think hindi pa ito yung parang na mainstream sa atin in the Philippines is yun nga, regulating AI, looking at algorithmic transparency. So if we look at yung coverage ng tech in other countries. Ito yung kumbaga medyo nasimula na nila. So I think there's a lot of stories and a lot of things that we can look at in the Philippine context where hindi natin alam, yung daily life natin is, we use AI and hindi natin alam yun nga, paano na-decide yun for me, So kaya part of the work that I do also as the AI Accountability Network Fellow of the Pulitzer Center is yun nga, we're trying to figure out how to find stories where we're able to better understand how AI works and sino yung who's impacted and kung mayroong, at a disadvantage, who's going to be accountable. It's interesting in the Philippine context because I remember one of the slides of Doc during the IJCon, meron siyang chart of, I think something to do with regulation, as I understand, if they're abiding with, standards and rules. So it would be interesting to see the scenario here in the Philippines, and not just, ChatGPT, but all of the other apps that we're using that, makes use of algorithms, for instance. So,
yeah, perfect segue to my next question, which has to do with your presentation also at the IJCon. And then also you wrote something which is on ResearchGate. People can search it on AI governance. In particular, I'm interested in your 4Es framework. Can you walk us through that?
Well, 4Es is my approach or an attempt, because my observation was whenever people talk governance, it's rather fragmented. Some people want to err on the side of compliance. Some people want to err on the side of like the tech. And education is barely mentioned. And the word ethics can mean many things to many people. So I said, why don't we all put that together? Let's talk education, first E, but not just the specialists. We need mass education. I mean, that's always been a problem. It's always been the domain of very specific experts. AI is pervasive, but education in AI is not. The engineering is a bit more elusive because, as I mentioned earlier, it's the training data, it's the prompting, and it's acceptable use. So it's one thing to police your ability to create content, and that covers the bias, the plagiarism. But it's another issue to police the use of the content, which covers deep fakes and all of these other AI-driven attacks. No? On the enforcement, third E, I think we're focusing too much on banning and punishing abuse. Certainly, we need that. We don't have any law that punishes AI misuse, but we also need incentives for research, innovation, and acceptable use guidelines. You don't need a law to create an acceptable use guideline, but maybe somebody should just put out some framework. And then back to the ethics, I think there are already some emerging commonly agreed principles. Accountability, you said, accuracy. There's one that I like, human in the loop. Under no circumstances should we allow AI to run on its own without the ability of a human to shut it down, or a human should be the one directing it. And that's how you solve the accountability problem. If a car hits someone, even if it's a self-driving car, if there's a human inside that car, they should be accountable because they would have had the last opportunity to brake. We don't have those rules yet. So that's 4E. And
so that's education, engineering,
enforcement,
and
ethics. And hopefully that brings people from various disciplines together as well. On a side note, I was invited to be a resource person at the House hearing on AI regulation. And I brought that framework with me. So we're assessing the pending bills using that framework. And I like it because the 4E is easy to remember. It's by no means comprehensive, but it's a good starting position because there's just so many facets to AI that can be elusive if you're sticking to one side only.
Maybe we can apply the 4Es to a specific problem. Now, let's say, I think one of the reasons why some teachers are afraid to go into AI is because they might get swamped with plagiarized text, right?
Yeah.
So, using the 4Es, how can we guide teachers into trying out AI in the classroom? Of course, with guidance from the administrations and so on.
Well, first thing we need to break is how come students aren't being taught prompt engineering in schools? For the most part, it's like teenage sex. I say they learn it outside and then sex ed fails to capture it. Parang ganun na rin yung nangyari sa AI. School should be the first place they learn about it properly, acceptable use guidelines. But let's also try not to be too defensive about education. that's also a trend I'm seeing. Curriculums have to change. Essays, most essays have to go and be replaced by something more dynamic, like oral recitation. You have to assume people will use AI to write an essay, and then add more parts of your curriculum to help the student explain that part. Or even better, challenge the AI. Is the AI correct? Or was it just a victim of confirmation bias? And let's face it, there's a lot of paperwork in school, both on the student and the teacher's part. So it's in everyone's best interest to get AI mobilized to reduce that paperwork so schools can focus on their two jobs, generate knowledge and generate labor. And on both fronts, I think we're all behind on that just because of the paperwork everyone has to do.
Carol, isn't that the same problem that some journalists think apply to journalism? That maybe some journalists will not do the work. They will just ask
AI to do it.
AI to do it. So how do we think about this?
Yeah, yan yung no. We see a lot of those comments and maybe even yun nga parang complaints or criticisms about AI. Kaya lang yun parang I think because it's here and it's not like we would go backwards. So yun nga I think if I go back to the research, I'm trying to look at a scenario na sana ay hindi tayo playing catch up. Yun, kasi parang even the digital shift nga, medyo yun, not all of us ay naka-shift pa talaga fully or have been successful dun sa shift na yun. So, and you have AI na ang bilis rin ng evolution niya. So, kaya parang, ayun, if anything, una is yun nga, as Doc mentioned, is yun nga, understanding how it works, understanding saan yung potential gaps niya, and thinking of ways of how it can benefit us, I think is, one of the first steps that we should do.
How do we leapfrog?
Well, okay. I'll start with a negative scenario, which Gemma mentioned. She was in the conference.
Gemma Mendoza.
Yeah, Gemma Mendoza, which is journalists, pretty much any media is now subject to algorithms anyway, on social media, on Google, and AI is becoming a big part of that. And that changes distribution of information, that changes the economics if you're reliant on advertisements. And at that point, if you're merely sticking to the content creation part, there's very little you can do.
Right.
So I think the other thing we haven't exercised so much is journalists are hardly represented in government hearings about AI regulation. That's where government should stop it, stop certain things from happening or put guardrails. Otherwise, it'll purely be, we'll all be reduced to the level of content creators. And you're seeing that as a trend also. Some journalists are becoming independent content creators also. Primarily economics, but also because the tools enable them to do so. So that's positive. But on the negative, does that affect the quality of the journalism we do? It's hard to say. How do we leapfrog? It would be nice if we're finally not just a consumer, that we're also innovating, we're also creating our own AI. And I think that's an existing gap. Schools have to catch up. They need hardware. I was just at the UP NVIDIA Center. So NVIDIA donated a $1 million cluster. Great, no? And it's nice to see big brands doing that.
You're rolling in money. Huh?
Yeah. Maybe, well, obviously to ensure their monopoly in terms of chips. But then, why don't we have that for every school? Why can't government step up, raise some money, and have an NVIDIA cluster for every? I mean, at some point, we need to, step. It's just like internet connectivity, Why are we not 100% wired up to the internet as a country? Because everything's correlated with internet connection. And that's the digital divide I brought up also that we need to resolve. I guess it's primarily political will, but we need to articulate that issue together. As I said, the governance discussion is so fragmented.
How do we leapfrog?
For me naman, apart from of course trying to take advantage of its use, babalikan ko yung investigating AI part. Kasi I think for a lot of newsrooms, malaki yung room na pwedeng buksan nun when we talk about reporting on tech, on big tech in particular. So the Philippines is one of the major, if not top consumers of social media content, for instance. It's not like, even though my digital divide, of course.
Sa lagay na yan, di ba?
Oo, sa lagay na yan, and we're exposed to a lot of applications. I think yun nga, maraming stories na pwedeng ma-uncover, but ito nga, looking at AI and the accountability aspect. I mentioned during the conference, yung pagkain na kinakain natin, products, go through rigorous testing, but why not algorithms and AI systems? So yun, I think that opens up a whole new world in terms of journalistic reporting and investigations.
This is on a relatively small scale, but I wanted to ask you both, no? But I have an I have a question about journalism. Would it help? Would it inspire more newsrooms to integrate AI into their workflows? If, for instance, there's a third party that gives out gives out awards for
Use of AI.
use of AI, like in the same way that the Pulitzer Center is synonymous with journalism merit, would that? I mean, that obviously that's just for the specific industry. Would something like that help?
I think that's clearly an intervention we can do without government. We should recognize, in a way, it's a soft incentive. It's a way of awarding people for being innovative, but it's also a way of dispersing best practices, which I believe we don't do enough, especially when it comes to technology. And given that AI is very pervasive, it's just like mass media awards, diba? We're way beyond that period now. We're in the internet era, now we're the AI era. We should be recognizing and awarding that. I just feel that right now, because the pace was so quick, imagine mo in less than 12 months, we're now at text to video. It's really hard to keep up. So by the time you make an award now, baka outdated na yung award mo. Yun yung challenge. At some point, it has
we'll have to give the award every quarter.
Like an award for something new, diba?
Yeah. How do you feel about this?
I think, of course, awards, malaking bagay yan for, apart of course from recognition, individual journalists and the newsroom. Sa akin, ang nakikita ko doon yung pag-spread ng methodology, which I think is very important when we talk about a lot of this, innovative tools or innovative ways of reporting. So, kasi yun nga, on one hand, you are recognized, pero on the other hand, we try to make it a point that maybe other newsrooms outside of Metro Manila could also, do the same things that we are doing.
Yeah, I'm just reminded, for instance, of the work that the Ongpin Awards put into encouraging investigative journalism and explanatory journalism, at least for maybe like 2 decades. That might have been a big help create this community of practice of IJ. Of course, this is just journalism. There are so many other fields, and we really need to get the government involved, right? I mean, we can't do this. We can't leapfrog without government.
On a completely different front, like kunyari, climate and disaster recovery, being the most disaster-hit country, or one of the most, shouldn't we be the most expert at mitigating disasters? So then substitute the word disinformation, AI, or social media for disasters. You would wonder, shouldn't the Philippines be the breeding ground for that knowledge? I would say yes, but maybe we need the structures to be able to gather that field experience and then share that to the world as needed.
We need more of the Manila Observatory,
absolutely,
which was the standard 100 plus years ago. We're running long, so let me just ask my last question for both of you. AI is there's so much happening in AI right now. I'd like to ask you, what do you personally look forward to? Maybe just in the next 6 months. That's something that will happen. We'll start with Carol and then we'll end with Doc.
Maybe for me, in the next 6 months, I'm hoping na yung ating usapan or the discourse about AI would move beyond ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes yung AI synonymous siya to ChatGPT alone. And of course, without any disregard for the concerns, kasi valid naman lahat yun. Pero kasi dahil baka nakakulong tayo doon sa usapan na yun, we might miss out on maybe other more important issues or maybe yun nga, the advantages that AI tools could afford us. At the very least, yun siguro yung within the next 6 months. And then also on the reporting side, I would love to see more reporting on AI, algorithms. It sounds all too technical, but if you realize it, we're using these tools, these algorithms anyway. So if anything, yung proximity niya, yung access niya, actually it's close. So
yeah, so that is one way to hold AI to account, no? To do stories on AI, right?
Along the same vein, more mainstreaming of AI. Just like once upon a time, Microsoft Excel and MS Word were not job required.
Exactly.
Now it's pervasive. It won't be long before prompt engineering or AI is a mandatory requirement. And that means more knowledge, more acceptance, and we can have more mature discussions about it. And I'm looking forward to AI regulation because there's a lot of abuse already. And right now, let's say deepfakes, which is completely different scenario, the police are not equipped to deal with it because it's not under cybercrime, it's not under privacy, although technically it is because it's AI. So we just need to equip people with the ability to defend themselves. But at the same time, I'd love to see incentives for innovation, those awards that you mentioned. Sana, in the next 6 months, we have that.
It could also be self-regulation, right? Like, for instance, KBP members, they can't show more than, 18 minutes of advertising per hour, that sort of thing. So, and that's just among themselves, no? So it could also be something like industry practitioners come together and say, hey,
let's have some rules.
Let's have some rules on AI. Otherwise,
Yeah, either you have your existing, associations kind of level up and add some AI to their stuff, or it will probably beg the creation of yet, more associations that have AI as a focus. It's probably time will just tell.
Thank you, Carol Ilagan of UP and PCIJ, and Dominic Ligot of Serolytics and Data Ethics PH and PCIJ. This has been an enlightening, educational, ethical, I'm looking for a fourth E, conversation. Again, many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for us tonight. The next step for engaged citizens, as always, is to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.